pronoun that refers to it. What does all this mean in practice? As you start a build, can't assume that the word items means the verb will be plural. In build a sentence questions, grammar isn't something you fix at the end. It actively limits what you can build. Word agreement is a convenient way to narrow options because mismatched words simply cannot go together. Word agreement means that certain parts of a sentence must match. This includes numbers such as singular versus plural, persons such as I, you, or they, and tense such as past or present. For the build a sentence tasks, we'll mostly pay attention to number. The other types of agreement are important in general, but just aren't as helpful for this specific task. When you start a build a sentence task, you'll usually want to find the possible subjects and verbs, but word agreement will limit which ones can go together. For example, a plural subject cannot take a singular verb. These results shows is incorrect, while these results show works. There is no possible way to have a plural subject and a singular verb, so that single letter S changes which structures are allowed. That's why agreement is such a powerful tool in this task. It removes options before you think about meaning. That example was a case of subject-verb agreement, which is the most important type of agreement when building sentences like this. But it's not always so simple. Sometimes the subject and the verb aren't right next to each other, but we still need them to match. This matters because build a sentence tasks often include long noun phrases or prepositional phrases that distract from the main subject. In the sentence, the list of items is on the desk. The subject is list, not items, so the singular verb is required. In contrast, the items are on the desk changes the subject to the plural items, so we can't assume that the word items means the verb will be plural. Similar to verbs, pronouns must agree with the nouns that they connect with, especially in number. In this example, our essays is plural, so any pronoun referring back to it must also be plural. A sentence that uses it instead of them breaks agreement. The original noun has to match the pronoun that refers to it later. So, what does all this mean in practice? As you start a build a sentence task, you'll look at the type of sentence, whether it's a question or a statement, and what the possible subjects and verbs can be. As you do that, you'll ask yourself which verb forms can follow a subject, and which subjects can logically match a verb. Often, verb agreement rules will make only one option possible. Here's the example we'll build. The sentence ends with a question mark, so the final structure must be a question. At first, several word orders may seem possible, but agreement will quickly limit those options. Let's start by locating our options for subject and verb. The words in purple are our verbs, and the words in pink are the possible subjects. Notice that two of these can't possibly go together. You and was don't match in number, so the sentence can't start with was you. Speaking of which, we should also note that this is a question. That means we need a helper verb before the subject. The only helper verb available is the word was. So that means we can start the sentence with the word was, and then the only noun that will agree with the verb is restaurant. Once we add in the word the, we have the start of our sentence. Was the restaurant. Looking at our remaining options, the phrase very expensive is attractive. That could end the sentence if it were shorter. Then we would have a simple question. Was the restaurant very expensive? That makes sense in context. So let's note that. Then look at the remaining words. The word where is our final hint. It has to go next to the restaurant to modify it. So we have the restaurant where. And to then complete the sentence, we can add in you ate. That makes our question, was the restaurant where you ate very expensive? And that works. Subject-verb agreement helps us start the sentence. Then the other pieces come one by one after. All right, a quick recap. Word agreement restricts what word combinations are possible. Before you place words, check the subjects and verbs to see which ones can connect. If there are multiple pronouns like he and they, also note their numbers. Use agreement to eliminate impossible combinations early and work step by step from there. In this lesson, we're going to talk about one small word that causes a lot of confusion in build a sentence questions, the word that. You probably know that from phrases like the book that I read, but on this question type, that actually shows up in three common but different ways, and each one puts it in a different spot in the sentence. Once you can tell the three apart, placing that becomes much easier. So what are the three common ways that can work? Let's give each one a simple name based on what it does. First, there's describing that. This is when that comes right after a noun to describe it, like the cafe that we found. The word that is describing which specific cafe you mean. Second, there's connector that. This is when that comes after a verb, and often after a verb about a perception or an opinion, such as know, feel, hear, or said, to connect two ideas together. For example, I heard that the store is closed. And third, there's pointing that. This is when that comes before a noun to point at something specific, like that lamp or during that time. Think of it like pointing your finger at one particular thing. The most important thing to remember is that each type puts that in a different position. Let's see how these work in real build a sentence questions, starting with describing that. Here's our first example. Take a moment to pause the video and try it yourself. When you come back, we'll walk through it step by step. We need to build a statement to answer the question. The word that is already given to us in a fixed position, and we can see it sitting between two groups of blanks. When we scan the answer choices, notice how there aren't any verbs like heard or said. So that is most likely being used to describe a specific noun, and that noun should be placed right before that. Looking at our options, the and books are a natural pair. So we end up with the books that. Now, how do we describe these books? Well, first, keep in mind that any sentence needs a main subject and a main verb. If we set aside the description for now, there's only one verb in the answer choices that we could use to create a full sentence. Were. So, the main sentence is, the books were very interesting. And with this information in place, we now know exactly how that describes the books. The speaker is talking about a specific set of books, the ones that his friend just borrowed. Again, notice that the main verb of the sentence comes after the whole description. The books that my friend recommended, that's the entire subject. And what about those books? They were very interesting. And together, they form the full sentence. So, the describing clause started by that sits in the middle, between the subject and the main verb. Now let's look at connector that. Here's a different question. Go ahead and pause the video for this one as well, so that you can try it on your own before we discuss it. The first speaker mentions the second speaker's boss. Looking at the answer choices, he is likely going to be the subject. Next, we need a verb. What did the boss do? Notice that there's not only a verb mentioned among the answer choices, but also a that. And mention that is how we're going to connect the main idea of the sentence to the additional information of the second idea. He mentioned that. After that, we build the second idea. The office will close early. So our full sentence is, he mentioned that the office will close early. Notice how that is being used to connect two ideas here. The main idea is, he mentioned something, and the extra information is, the office will close early. The word that is the bridge between them. Finally, let's look at pointing that. Here's our third example. Go ahead and pause the video to try and fill in the 5 blanks here on your own first. The first person asks, should we eat here tonight? And we need to build a statement. Looking at the answer choices, there's no verb like no or told, so that isn't going to be a connector. Furthermore, we can't place a noun before that and end up with a full sentence. If we try restaurant that always has a long wait, that's not a complete sentence because that entire thing is a subject with no main verb. Instead, that is pointing at a specific restaurant. That restaurant. So that has to go right before the noun. From there, the rest falls into place. That restaurant is the subject. The subject needs a verb, which in this case is has. And then a long wait is the object. So once you realize that the role of that here is pointing, it slots right into the position before the noun. Let's recap with a quick checklist. When you see that in a build a sentence question, ask yourself 3 questions. First, is that being used to add more information to describe a specific noun? If so, that will go right after the noun, the pencils that she used on the test. Second, is that coming after a verb like know, said, feel, or heard? Then it's a connector. It bridges 2 ideas, like she saw that the man was upset. Third, is that pointing at something specific? Then it goes right before the noun. That table is not balanced. Identifying which job that is doing can provide you with some big clues about where its position will be. Some build a sentence questions ask you to build sentences that have 2 parts, a main idea and a secondary idea tucked inside it. These can feel overwhelming at first because the answer choices have a lot of pieces and the final sentence is long. But there's a strategy that makes them much more manageable. Find the boundary between the 2 parts, build each one separately, and then connect them. So what do I mean by 2 parts? Think of it this way. A simple statement like he designed the building has one idea, but a statement like he learned how the building was designed has 2 ideas packed together. The main idea is he learned something. The secondary idea is how the building was designed. Words like that, who, where, when, how, and whether often mark where one part ends and the other begins. When you spot one of these words among the answer choices, that's a strong signal that the sentence has 2 parts. Here's the strategy. First, find the boundary word, the word that separates the 2 parts. Then work on building the main idea first, because it usually comes at the beginning of the sentence. Finally, attach the secondary idea after the boundary word. Let's see this in action with a couple of examples. Here, the first sentence asks about a project deadline, and we need to build a statement. Go ahead and pause the video to try it on your own first. Then we'll walk through it together. Looking at the answer choices, we can spot the boundary word when that tells us there are two parts to this statement. Since the first speaker has asked about a person, the manager, she is looking like it will be the subject of our sentence. There are two possibilities for the main verb, finished and wanted, but we'll try wanted first because there's another important phrase among the choices. To know and wanted to know something is a common expression. So, building out the main idea, we have she wanted to know something. Now we need to attach the secondary idea. First comes the boundary word when. Then, after the boundary word, we have a noun phrase, the current project, and a verb phrase, would be finished. Combining all of that together gives us the whole secondary idea when the current project would be finished. I called this example the ending pattern because the secondary idea came at the end of the statement. The main idea follows the normal subject-verb-object order, which means that the main idea subject comes first, followed by its verb. There's no object yet, but we know we need something there. And that's where the boundary word and the secondary idea slot in. They act as the object and close out the sentence. Next, let's look at a different kind of two-part sentence. In this example, the secondary idea actually interrupts the main idea, splitting it in half. Go ahead and pause the video and try this one on your own first. The first speaker asks about a speech debate, and we need to build a statement. The word who is among the answer choices, and that's a boundary word. It marks the start of a secondary idea that describes a person. And since who can only describe a person, it has to go right after the student who. Now, here's where it gets tricky. The boundary word who came right after the subject, so what happened to our main verb? Well, this time the boundary word has interrupted the main idea. So let's think about that main idea first. Our two verb options are presented first and received. Both are grammatical, but the first sentence here sounds strange and doesn't make a lot of sense in the context. Plus, we still need to fit the who and the other verb in there. So that's not going to work. So the main idea must be the student received the highest score. Looking at the full sentence, we see that the secondary idea has split the main idea into two pieces. The student is the subject of the main idea. We then have the boundary word who, followed by the secondary idea's details. Presented first, and then the main idea concludes with its verb and object. Received the highest score. So, this split pattern can be challenging to deal with in Build a Sentence. The key is to recognize that the main verb actually gets pushed to later in the sentence. It doesn't come right after the subject like you might initially expect. To summarize, when you see a long Build a Sentence question, check to see if there's a boundary word in the answer choices. Words like that, who, where, when, how, and whether are strong indicators that the statement has two parts. Build the main idea first, and then attach the secondary idea. But watch out for the split pattern, where the secondary idea interrupts the main idea and pushes the main verb to later in the sentence. This lesson focuses on organization patterns for the academic discussion task. We'll look at some recommendations for how to respond to this question. I use the word recommendations because while this is a strong approach and a strategy that works well for many people, there are many different ways someone could respond to these questions. The goal here is not to give you the only correct structure, but to show you a reliable way to organize a strong response. My main advice is to find an approach that works for you and stick with it. What we're looking at in this video is a simple and straightforward way to make sure you are covering all the requirements needed to score well on the test. Think of this as a format you can use consistently. Let's take a look at the main components of that format. The first thing you always need to do to score well on this question type is to clearly state your argument or your opinion in response to the professor's question. In addition to that, we strongly recommend focusing on the two students in the discussion. Specifically, choose one student to agree with and one student to disagree with. This is not technically a requirement of the question. You don't have to agree with one and disagree with the other to score well. However, this approach provides a very simple structure and gives you clear content to write about. Remember that you only have 10 minutes to complete this task. Using this approach consistently makes it much easier to ensure you have enough to say within that time limit. In the next lesson, we'll introduce a set of template phrases that give you ready-made language for each of these components. A phrase for stating your opinion, one for agreeing, one for disagreeing, and so on. For now, let's focus on the structure itself. And the last absolute requirement is that your response includes clear explanations, examples, and details. When you state your opinion and when you refer to ideas from other students, you need to explain what you mean. In other words, you are not just stating opinions, you are answering the question why by providing reasons and support for your ideas. These explanations are a critical part of a strong response. Now let's look at how these components work together in a standard question. Here is a sample prompt for you to review. Rather than reading it together right now, I recommend pausing the video so you can take time to read the professor's question and the discussion contributions from Ren and Astrid. Go ahead and pause the video now, read through the question and responses, and then we'll look at a sample answer. Assuming you've had a chance to read through the question, let's now look at a response that incorporates the elements we discussed at the beginning of the video. The first thing you'll notice in this sample response is that the writer begins by agreeing with one of the students. In this case, they agree with Ren. This is a strong way to begin because it allows the writer to immediately contribute to the discussion by responding to a classmate while also presenting their own perspective on the professor's question. The response begins by saying, I agree with Ren's perspective that online education makes learning more accessible. This approach works well as an opening strategy. Next, the writer provides examples and explanations. This is essential. Whenever you state an opinion or present a perspective, you need to explain it. In this response, the writer explains how online education reduces barriers and creates opportunities for people with physical disabilities or family responsibilities. These details clarify and support the main point introduced at the beginning. After that, the writer moves on to disagreement. They select Astrid and acknowledge that she makes a reasonable point about traditional classrooms offering opportunities for socialization and community building. However, the writer then introduces a counter-argument by explaining that traditional classrooms may overlook the needs of some learners. This disagreement is followed by explanation. The writer explains why meeting the needs of all students in a traditional classroom can be difficult, and contrasts that with the flexibility of online education platforms. Finally, the writer states their overall position in response to the professor's question. They explain that while online education may not completely replace traditional classrooms, it provides an important balance in modern education. This response demonstrates how the main components work together. There are multiple places where examples and explanations appear, which is typical and expected. These explanations work alongside the other recommended components, stating your opinion, agreeing with one student, and disagreeing with the other. You might be wondering whether you need to follow this exact order every time. The answer is no. It is also a perfectly valid strategy to begin by stating your overall opinion first, and then move into disagreement and agreement afterward. You can change the order in any way that makes sense to you, as long as your ideas are clear and logically connected. For example, you might begin with your opinion, then disagree with one student, and then agree with the other. If you want to see how that looks, you can pause the video and read the example on the screen. It shows the same ideas presented in a different order with a slightly different structure. To summarize, this question type does not require a formal essay structure, so you do not need a traditional introduction or conclusion. Instead, choose an organization pattern that you like, practice it consistently, and focus on keeping your argument clear and consistent throughout your response. Make sure you transition logically between ideas and use explanations and examples to support every main point you make. Once you have this organizational structure down, the template phrases from the next lesson will snap right into it. "10 minutes. That's all the time you get on the academic discussion task. And in those 10 minutes, you need to read the professor's question, read what two students have said, decide where you stand, write your own response, and proofread it before time runs out. When the clock is ticking, the last thing you want is to spend precious seconds trying to figure out how to phrase your agreement or how to transition from one idea to the next. That's where templates come in. A template, in this context, is a set of ready-made phrases organized by what they do. There's a set for stating your opinion, a set for agreeing with a classmate, a set for disagreeing, a set for supporting your claims, and a set for connecting your ideas together. You pick the phrase that fits the moment and build from there. It cuts down your planning time, it gives your response a clear structure, and it lets you focus your energy on the part that actually matters most, your ideas. Now, here's something I want to be clear about from the start. These phrases handle the structural side of your response, the way you open your argument, reference a classmate, or move from one point to the next. But the thinking has to come from you. The skills from our other lessons, organizing your response, making a clear argument, contributing to the discussion, supporting your opinions with reasons and examples, those are still doing the real work. A response built entirely on smooth-sounding phrases, but without any real substance behind them, won't score well. Templates speed up the process of getting your ideas onto the screen. They don't replace the ideas themselves. We've put together a downloadable guide that you can access from the link beneath this video. It includes 5 phrase menus, one for each function I just mentioned, plus a response skeleton that works regardless of the topic. Each menu gives you several options to choose from, so you're not locked into one way of saying things. The goal is to find phrases that feel comfortable and natural to you. In this lesson, we'll walk through one complete example so you can see how all 5 menus work together in a real response. Here's our practice prompt. Go ahead and pause the video to read through it. Dr. Sharma's Sociology of Technology class is discussing artificial intelligence in the workforce. Sam believes AI will help workers in the long run by creating new jobs and freeing people from repetitive tasks. Lena is worried that AI will hurt workers because it can replace skilled jobs, and many people won't have the resources to retrain. We're going to side with Lena on this one and build a response from scratch, pulling phrases from the guide as we go. Let's start with our opening. We need to signal right away which side we're on. One efficient way to do that is to combine a disagreement with Sam and a statement of our position in a single sentence. The disagreeing menu gives us a phrase for this. Although Name's perspective is understandable, I would argue that. So our opening becomes, although Sam's perspective is understandable, I would argue that AI poses a serious risk to workers. One sentence, 2 jobs done. We've acknowledged Sam and declared our position. When you only have 10 minutes, that kind of efficiency counts. Now we need to explain why we disagree with Sam. The disagreeing menu has another useful phrase here. What this argument overlooks is, so we write, what this argument overlooks is that AI can replace not only manual tasks, but also skilled work like legal research and financial analysis. The phrase gets us into the explanation, and then specific details, the legal research, the financial analysis, those are our own content. That's the pattern you'll see over and over. The template opens the door, and your own thinking walks through it. Next, let's bring in our agreement with Lena. The agreeing menu gives us several options. We'll use, I share Lena's view that many workers will be left behind. That's clean and direct. It names Lena, paraphrases her idea, and keeps us moving forward. Then, from the building on section. To build on Lena's point, retraining programs are expensive and time-consuming, and not everyone has the resources to start over in a new field. We're not just saying we agree. We're adding something new that strengthens the shared position. Now we need a concrete example to make this argument feel real. The supporting your claims menu gives us, for instance, in my own experience, and we can adapt that a bit to create the following. For instance, in my own country, a large bank recently replaced hundreds of customer service employees with an AI system, and most of those workers are still searching for comparable jobs a year later. That example is invented, but it's specific and believable, which is exactly what the scoring rubric rewards. Finally, a closing sentence to tie everything back to the professor's question. The transitions menu gives us, ultimately, so we write, ultimately, AI may create new industries someday, but the workers who lose their jobs today cannot wait for that future to arrive. That brings the response full circle. Here's the complete response on screen. Feel free to pause the video and read through it. The phrases pulled from the guide are highlighted in purple. Everything else, the examples about legal research and financial analysis, the bank that replaced its employees, the point about retraining costs, that's all original content. The response comes in at about 125 words. It references both Sam and Lena by name, takes a clear side, and reads as one connected argument from start to finish. So here's what to take away from this lesson. Templates give you the structural language, a way to open your argument, respond to your classmates, and move between ideas without losing momentum. But the substance still has to come from you. The skills from our other lessons, organization, argument building, contributing to the discussion, supporting your opinions, those are what make your response worth reading. Templates just help you get there faster. When you practice, start with the phrase menus open beside you and deliberately choose one phrase from each menu. Then try the same prompt again with different phrases. And eventually, close the guide and write on your own. Over time, the structural language will stop feeling borrowed and start feeling like yours. That's the goal. A question that comes up frequently for the academic discussion task is whether you should choose only one side of the professor's question versus arguing for both sides. This is a good question because in real life, both sides of the argument are probably valid, and you may see some ambiguity or gray area rather than a clear right answer. However, what I want to suggest in this video is that, for the purpose of this TOEFL writing task, it is much more helpful to choose one side and stick with it. Why should you pick a side? In a word, clarity. When you are deciding what to say and what to focus on in your response, choose the option that is easiest for you to write about clearly and stay with it. In many cases, that will be your true opinion, but sometimes you will not have a strong preference. In that case, just pick a side and commit. The key point here is that communication is more important than complexity. Even if you personally hold a more complex position, you usually do not have enough time in 10 minutes to explain that complexity clearly. There's another reason to not stake a nuanced position. It's an unnecessary risk. You can get a top score by picking a single side, so there's no benefit to trying something more challenging. Let's look at the examples below. Both writers are ultimately arguing for the same thing. A 4-day work week would be nice, but it's not realistic. Thus, we need a different solution. However, it's much harder to follow the reasoning of the writer at the bottom of this slide. Are they agreeing with just Maya, just Ricardo, or both? What exactly is their position? If that writer instead argued for a single side by default, their argument would be clearer to begin with and could likely score higher. Now, let's look at the actual prompt for the responses we just read. Go ahead and pause the video to read through it. Here's the first thing to notice about this academic discussion task. Its design already fits this pick one side idea. One student agrees that a 4-day work week is better and the other disagrees. So you can do the same thing. Agree with one student and disagree with the other student. So, regardless of which side you pick, your job at this task is the same. You need to support one student with additional examples, reasoning, or elaboration. And then you need to counter the other student with additional examples, reasoning, or elaboration. By committing to this strategy ahead of time, you already know what to do on test day and have saved valuable time up front. There's no decision to make as far as whether you should agree with both students, only agree with one, or disagree with both. Instead, the plan is already set. Now, taking either side of this prompt is perfectly workable. Maya gives you the foundations of a pro argument: efficiency, rest, focus. Ricardo gives you the foundations of a skeptical argument: scheduling difficulties, stress. Either way, you're going to need to come up with something new, specific examples, reasoning that the prompt didn't mention, details that make your position feel real and not just restated. So, which side should you pick? Honestly, it doesn't matter much. Commit to whichever you feel more confident elaborating on. If you can picture a specific company that's piloted a shorter week, go with Maya. If you've personally experienced trouble getting a timely doctor appointment, go with Ricardo. For this video, we've sided with Maya and created a sample response. Feel free to pause the video and read through it. The phrases highlighted in purple are from our template guide. They handle the structural moves. Everything else is either elaborating on Maya's point with more details and support, or countering Ricardo's position with more details and support. That elaboration is what makes the argument work, and it all flows from having committed to one clear position at the start. So here's what to take away. Argue for one side to keep your position plain and clear. Pick whichever student you feel more confident elaborating on, and commit. Once you've decided, your plan is clear. Keep your position focused, and you'll have a much better chance of producing the kind of well-elaborated response that earns top marks on this task. One of your responsibilities in the academic discussion question is to contribute meaningfully to the discussion. In this lesson, we'll focus on how to do that in a clear and effective way. One helpful approach, technically optional but strongly recommended, is to agree with one student in the discussion and disagree with the other. In every prompt, the two students will express different opinions in response to the professor's question. Taking one clear position makes your response easier to organize and easier for a reader to follow. If you take one side of the debate, it naturally makes sense to align yourself with one student and explain why you disagree with the other. Another key goal is to use your own words when referring to the other student's ideas. This can be challenging, but paraphrasing shows strong English ability. You may reuse a word or short phrase if necessary, but you should avoid copying full sentences or long sections from their posts. Remember, the purpose of citing other students is not to summarize them. It is to strengthen your own argument. Let's look at a sample academic discussion prompt. Imagine the professor asks, "Our topic this week is social mobility. Some believe that everyone has an equal opportunity to improve their socioeconomic status, while others argue that structural factors limit social mobility. Where do you stand in this debate?" This is a two-sided question. One side argues that hard work allows anyone to succeed. The other side argues that background, education, and access to resources limit opportunities for many people. Now let's look at the first student response. Eve argues that social mobility is strongly affected by structural barriers. She points to issues like educational inequality, racial discrimination, and income inequality, and explains that these obstacles can be extremely difficult to overcome regardless of personal motivation. If you agree with Eve, your goal is to cite her idea, paraphrase it, and then use it to support your own argument. For example, using a phrase from the agreeing with a student menu in our template guide, a response might say, "I agree with Eve's point that societal barriers significantly limit social mobility." The key here is to keep Eve's core idea, but state it with different wording. Then we elaborate on Eve's point by adding new ideas. To build on Eve's point, cycles of poverty and limited access to healthcare make it nearly impossible for some families to improve their circumstances, no matter how hard they work. These points were not mentioned by Eve, but they support the same position and make the argument stronger. This is an effective way to use another student's post to move your own argument forward. Now, let's look at the opposing viewpoint. Carol acknowledges that people do not all start from the same circumstances, but she believes that hard work and perseverance allow individuals to overcome these barriers. Her argument focuses on effort, determination, and personal responsibility as the main drivers of success. If you have already agreed with Eve, you now need to disagree with Carol. Using a phrase from the disagreeing with a student template, a strong response might say, "While Carol raises a fair point about effort and determination, I believe it does not reflect the full reality." Notice how the template phrase lets us acknowledge Carol's argument respectfully before we push back. We then need to explain why we disagree. Our response might point out that hard work alone is often not enough to overcome obstacles like unequal education, income gaps, or racial bias. Again, the student in the discussion is cited briefly, their idea is paraphrased, and that idea is used to reinforce our own position. To contribute effectively to an academic discussion, agree with one student and disagree with the other. Paraphrase their ideas using your own words, and remember that your main goal is to clearly state and support your own opinion. Use the opposing argument to highlight weaknesses and strengthen your position. When you do this well, you show both strong reasoning and strong control of academic English. In the academic discussion task, you'll be evaluated on how well you support your opinions. In this video, we'll look at what that means and how to do it. First, let's take a look at the official criteria for a top score from ETS. You're evaluated on relevant and well-elaborated explanations, exemplification, and details. In other words, you need to explain your ideas and provide examples and details. You cannot simply state an opinion and move on. You need to explain what you mean. A good way to think about this is with three basic tools: explanations, examples, and details. This is not an extremely complicated concept, so let's start with a simple illustration. Imagine the question is, what is the best type of vacation? You might say, sunny beach vacations are the best. That's a clear opinion, but the natural next question is, why? Answering that why is exactly what support means. For example, you might say, spending time at the ocean is fun, and there's something for everyone to enjoy. Kids love playing in the sand and the water, and adults like relaxing on the sand. Those are reasons and details that support the original opinion. The topic on your test will be more complex than vacations, but the process is the same. Throughout your response, you will make your argument. Sometimes you will state your main opinion, And sometimes you will respond to the other student's perspectives, but each time you make a claim, you need to explain why. Here is a test-like example. Imagine the professor asks, which do you think is more effective in tackling climate change? Personal responsibility or collective action? In other words, are individual actions more important, or are larger efforts like government policy and organized campaigns more effective? You might write, in my opinion, collective action is more effective in tackling climate change. That is a clear opinion, but if that is your main position, it is your responsibility to elaborate and explain why. One explanation could be, while personal responsibility is important, it is largely limited in scope and may not produce significant results on a global scale. One important factor to consider is that collective actions such as policy changes and large-scale industrial transformations can affect broader systems. This leads to more significant and comprehensive changes to mitigate climate change. That is what supporting an opinion looks like. It is not enough to state a position. You need to explain it. This is not easy, especially because you only have 10 minutes to complete the task and come up with strong reasons under time pressure. The point is not that generating these ideas is effortless. The point is that the skill you are practicing is answering why. If your opinion is this, why is that your opinion? Your job is to add enough detail that your meaning is clear. Now let's look at a different prompt and walk through the process across a full response. Consider this question. This week we're discussing the advantages and disadvantages of universal healthcare. Some argue that healthcare is a fundamental right and should be available to all, while others believe that a free market healthcare system promotes quality and innovation. Where do you stand on this debate? One side argues that healthcare should be a basic right available to everyone. The other side argues that healthcare should operate in a free market system, more like a business. You need to choose a position and then support it. Now imagine one student in the discussion is named John. John says, I strongly believe that healthcare is a basic human right. Everyone should have access to healthcare, irrespective of their economic condition. Universal healthcare should ensure that everyone gets treated fairly. If you agree with John, you can use his comment to help develop your own argument. For example, you might write, John's perspective, advocating healthcare as a fundamental human right, deeply resonates with me. This mentions John, contributes to the discussion, and clearly signals which side you are taking. Next, you need to support that opinion with reasons and detail. You might add something like, I am firmly of the opinion that universal healthcare can foster equality and provide a safety net for all members of society, regardless of their economic status. This is because it's a key stepping stone toward a healthier and more productive society, and it alleviates the financial burden on families struggling with medical costs. This is the why section that explains your claim. In many cases, 1 or 2 sentences of explanation can be enough for each major opinion you state. You do not have a lot of time or space to do more than that. Still, your goal in practice should be to add as much supportive detail as you can. As you practice, time yourself. See how much support you can add within the time limit while keeping your grammar and word choice accurate. The more clearly you can develop your ideas, the stronger your response will be. Finally, here is the full prompt for the question that we just looked at about healthcare and the free market system. We've got John's response that we looked at earlier, and we've got Natalie's response that we're adding to it. A full response to this will refer to both. And here's that full response, including some of the language that we've looked at so far. It also goes through Natalie's contribution. In this example, the writer disagrees with Natalie, but most importantly, they then go on to provide a detailed explanation about why. Your response may not look exactly like this, but the same general approach should be there. Provide a clear opinion, then provide details, examples, or explanations for your opinions. In the end, the main point of this lesson is quite simple, but it's important. To score well on the academic discussion task, you need to not only give your opinion, but explain it well. Most of what you write will be those explanations. Try to write as much as possible, and time yourself doing that to see how much clear and relevant detail and examples you can provide, while keeping enough time to edit at the end, to be sure you have correct grammar and spelling. In this lesson, we'll continue talking about the write an email task, focusing on how to organize your response and how to manage your time. We'll walk through a basic structure that you can follow every time, and we'll look at each part of an example in detail so you can see how it comes together. Before we get into the structure itself, let's talk about timing. You have 7 minutes total. So here's a simple way to divide that up. Start with about 1 minute of planning, reading the prompt carefully, making sure you understand all 3 bullet points, and maybe jotting down a word or two for each one. Then spend the bulk of your time, around 4 to 5 minutes, writing, especially body paragraphs, and leave 1 to 2 minutes at the end to proofread. We'll come back to what to focus on during proofreading at the end of this lesson. When it comes to the structure of your email, you don't need anything complicated, just a clear, consistent format. Here's what that looks like. Start with a greeting that matches the tone of the situation and the person you're addressing. You may also want to add a quick opening sentence. Then you'll write one paragraph, about 2 sentences, for each bullet point in the prompt. These body paragraphs are where you should spend the most time and effort. Lastly, wrap things up with a closing line and a sign off that once again matches the tone. This structure helps to keep your writing organized and easy to follow. And in the next lesson, we'll add another layer to this, specific phrases for different types of situations that you can plug right into each part of this structure. This is the same sample prompt that we had in the introductory lesson. If you haven't already read this, please take a moment to pause the video to make sure that you understand the scenario and the instructions. In this case, a friend is having a birthday party. You need to respond to tell her that you won't be able to attend and to suggest another opportunity to meet up. This is an example of a declining type of email. You need to navigate a constraint and still keep things friendly. That's one of the common types of situations you'll encounter on the TOEFL, and we'll explore the others in later lessons. Let's start with the greeting, which should be brief, so keep it quick. You want to choose a tone that fits the situation. For example, if you're writing to a professor, you'll probably want to use Dear Professor Wilkins. But if you're writing to a classmate or a friend, Hi Lena works well. You can also include a short opening sentence before jumping into the bullet points. In this case, Happy early birthday sets a nice tone before moving into the body of the email. Next, let's talk about the first body paragraph. Remember, each paragraph should take you roughly 90 seconds. This is where you respond to the first bullet point in the instructions. For our example prompt, we need to thank her for the invitation. After thanking her, one phrase that works well in this kind of situation where we have to decline is, I understand how important this is to you. It's warm and shows you genuinely care. So we could write something like, thank you so much for the invitation. I understand how important this birthday dinner is to you, and I really do wish I could be there. I had such a big smile on my face when I received your text. Notice how that's much more than a generic thank you. It adds specific feeling and keeps the message natural. As you aim for at least 2 full sentences, work to include a variety of sentence structures and vocabulary. That helps your writing feel more fluent and expressive. For body paragraph 2, you're covering the second bullet point. Again, aiming for at least 2 full sentences. You need to include extra details, but it's completely fine if they're not true. It's okay to be creative here, and we'll go much deeper into how to invent those details in our next lesson. For now, the key thing is that your ideas make sense and support the task. For our prompt, we need to explain that we can't attend. The context given was a family event, so perhaps a wedding. A useful phrase to lead with here is, unfortunately, the reason makes it impossible for me to attend. It's direct but still polite. So we could write, unfortunately, I won't be able to attend next weekend. I'm so sorry. My cousin is getting married, so I'll be flying back home to be part of the wedding. For the last body paragraph, we need to address the third bullet point, suggesting another time to get together. Even though these are separate paragraphs, the ideas between them are often connected, so using transition words like however or that said is a great way to show that connection. A helpful phrase for proposing an alternative is, would it help if we, suggestion? It's collaborative and warm, so we could write, however, I really want to see you. Would it help if we met up for lunch on the last Saturday of this month? I'd love to celebrate with you, even if it's a little late. Lastly, we'll close out the email, and like the greeting, this should also be quick. It can be good to end with one final sentence that connects back to the situation. Something like, I'm really hoping we can meet up again soon. Then choose a sign-off that matches the tone of your email. If the situation is more formal, like writing to a professor, you might use sincerely or regards. But for a classmate or friend, take care or best or see you soon is more appropriate. Then write your name on the last line. And here are all the pieces put together. Feel free to pause the video and read through the whole thing. The parts that are in purple are the greeting and the closing. Pretty standard, but not where your score is made. Don't spend much time on them. Instead, focus on the body paragraphs, in black. That's what you're being graded on most. Together, they make a complete, organized response of about 120 words, and they cover all 3 bullet points in the prompt. Before we wrap up, let's quickly talk about proofreading. That lasts 1 to 2 minutes. When you go back over your email, check the content first. Have you addressed all 3 bullet points? Are there any details you still need to add? Then check for clarity. Are your ideas easy to follow? Do your paragraphs connect logically? Lastly, fix any grammar or spelling mistakes you notice, but don't panic over small errors. Content and clarity matter more than perfect mechanics. We'll see proofreading in action in our final lesson, putting it all together. To sum up, for this task, structure matters. Start with about 1 minute of planning. Then follow a clear format like the following: a greeting, one paragraph of at least 2 sentences for each bullet point, and then a sign off. Spend the most time on your body paragraphs, and then use the final 1 to 2 minutes to proofread. Be sure to keep your tone appropriate throughout. You don't need to be perfect, just clear, organized, and complete. In this lesson, we're going to talk about using templates, specifically ready-made phrases that can help you write faster and more naturally on the write an email task. We'll look at what templates are, how they fit into your overall strategy, and then walk through a complete example together. Have you ever sat down for a timed writing task and spent the first minute just staring at the screen, trying to figure out how to start? That's where templates come in. A template is a collection of ready-made phrases, organized by function, that give you a starting point. Instead of staring at a blank screen, you reach for a phrase like, I was wondering if you could, or I wanted to reach out about, and build from there. It saves time, it helps you sound natural, and it gives your writing a clear professional structure right from the start. But here's an important point, and I want to be upfront about this. Templates help with how to say something, but they can't replace what to say. You'll also need skills we'll cover in upcoming lessons. Inventing realistic details to fill out your paragraphs, choosing the right tone for the situation, and using a mix of general and specific sentences to make your writing flow well. Templates give you sentence starters. Those upcoming skills give you something worth saying. A response full of polished phrases but with vague, undeveloped body paragraphs won't score well. So think of templates as one tool in your toolkit, a helpful one, but not the only one. We've put together a downloadable guide that you can access from the link beneath this video. All email responses follow the same general structure we discussed in the organization lesson. However, the template comes with phrase menus for 5 different task types because the language you need for making a request is genuinely different from the language you need for giving feedback or navigating a disagreement. Each type has several phrase options per bullet point, so you can pick what fits the situation. You're not memorizing a script, you're building a personal library of phrases that sound like you. In fact, you'll ideally get to a point where you can adapt these phrases to use your own words. Here's our example prompt. Take a moment to pause the video and read through it. You took an introductory biology class with Dr. Kwan last semester and became very interested in her research on water quality. Now you want to ask about summer research positions in her lab. There are 3 bullet points. Explain your situation and why you're writing. Describe what kind of experience you're hoping to gain, and ask whether there are any positions available. This is what we'd call a requesting help or action task. You're writing to ask for something, and since Dr. Kwan is a professional authority figure, the tone should be formal. Let's start building the email. For the greeting, since we're writing to an authority figure, we'll use Dear Dr. Kwan. That's the standard formal option. Then, an opening sentence to ease into the body. Something like, I hope you're doing well. Short, warm, and appropriate for the register. Don't spend too much time here. The body paragraphs are what matter most. For the first body paragraph, we need to explain our situation and why we're writing. The Type 1 phrase menu gives us several options here, like I recently situation, and I wanted to reach out for your help, or I've been situation, and I was hoping you might be able to help. Let's go with the first one. I recently finished your introductory biology course, and I wanted to reach out for your help. Your lectures on environmental science were what first got me interested in water quality research. Notice how the first sentence comes straight from the template. We just filled in our situation. The second sentence is all content. That's where your own ideas and details do the work. For the second body paragraph, we need to describe what kind of experience we're hoping to gain. The Type 1 phrase menu gives us options like, specifically, what I need help with is, and the main challenge I'm facing is. The first one fits perfectly here. Specifically, what I need help with is finding an opportunity to develop hands-on research skills. I'm especially interested in learning data collection and analysis methods, and I think working in a lab setting would be the best way to build that foundation. The opening phrase is straight from the template, but the details, the research skills, the data collection, the lab setting, those are invented. They make the paragraph feel real and specific. Now, for the third body paragraph, the actual request. This is where polite language really matters. The template guide has phrases like, I was wondering if you could specific request, and Would you be available to specific action? Notice that these are all questions or conditional forms, not commands. That's the right tone for a formal request. So we could write, I was wondering if you could let me know whether there are any summer research positions available in your lab. I would love the chance to contribute to your team's work and gain experience in the field. Soft, polite, and specific about what you're asking for. Lastly, we'll close it out. A closing sentence like, thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you, works well here. It's formal and matches the rest of the email. Then a sign off. Sincerely, followed by your name. Here's the full email put together. Feel free to pause the video and read through it. The phrases that came from the template guide are colored purple. Everything else, the details about environmental science, data collection, the specific request for a summer position, that's all original content. Together, the email is right around 120 words. It covers all 3 bullet points. It maintains a consistent formal tone, and it reads naturally from start to finish. So to sum up, templates give you the scaffolding, a way to start sentences, connect ideas, and close your email with confidence. But the substance still has to come from you. The skills from upcoming lessons, inventing realistic details, choosing the right tone and register, and managing your time, will do the heavy lifting with your content. Templates just make it easier to get your ideas on the page. As you practice, try writing with the phrase menus open at first, then rewrite the same prompt using different phrases, and eventually write without looking at the guide at all. Over time, the phrasing will come naturally, and you'll start developing your own variations. When that happens, the templates have done their job. Here's a question you might not have expected to answer while preparing for the TOEFL exam. How good of a liar are you? To be fair, I don't really mean lying, at least not in the way somebody might lie in their daily life. More accurately, I mean storytelling. It may seem surprising, but this is an important skill, especially for the writing section. Inventing details and making up stories is not only allowed, it's often necessary if you want to complete the task well. The only thing being tested on the TOEFL is your English ability. The test uses plausible, real-life situations, but only as a vehicle to see how well you communicate. That's especially true in the write an email task. You'll be asked to write in a hypothetical situation about an experience you didn't actually have. So as long as your details make sense and support your message, the TOEFL does not care whether they are true. Facts don't matter, but creativity, on the other hand, can be very, very helpful. One reason to invent details is actually realism. Real-life emails always include specifics, places, numbers, feelings, examples. Inventing details makes your writing sound more natural and gives you more to say. Without them, your email response will feel short or repetitive. Think of the template phrases from our last lesson. Those give you great sentence starters. But what comes after the starter is where inventing details really matters. A phrase like, the reason I thought of you is that, is a strong opening. But you need something specific and genuine sounding to finish it off. That's where this skill comes in. Let's look at this in practice. Here's the example prompt we'll be working with. Take a moment to pause the video and read through it carefully. You work at a marketing company that has launched a mentorship program for new employees, and a coworker named Diane has been recommended as a potential mentor. This is what we'd call a recruiting email. You're trying to get someone involved in something you're organizing or supporting. The 3 bullet points are, describe the program and how it works, explain why you think Diane would make a great mentor, and ask if she'd be willing to sign up. Notice that the task itself is simple. If you only answer those 3 points without adding any detail, your email will technically work. However, it won't score as well since it's so thin on content. That's exactly what we see in this first version. This response does what the prompt asks, but it stays very general. We don't really learn anything specific about the program, and the reason Diane would be a good mentor is vague. Note that the grammar is correct. The ideas from each bullet point are addressed, and the tone is appropriate, but we can do better and score higher. Now let's look at the same prompt again, but with it Different mindset. Instead of asking, what must I include? Try asking, what could reasonably be true in this situation? For a mentorship program, you can reasonably invent details like how often meetings happen, what the program covers, or how long it lasts. For Diane specifically, you can invent moments you've observed. Her explaining something patiently, her experience on a specific type of project, her reputation on the team. These things don't need to be true, they just need to fit. Here's the same email with invented details in pink. Notice how the purple phrases come right from our templates and anchor each paragraph, such as, I wanted to reach out because I think you'd be a great fit for, I'm excited to share that. The reason I thought of you is that all of those phrases give us a solid starting point, but everything after those openers, the monthly check-ins, the 2 to 3 hour commitment, the client presentations that Diane handles so well, the specific request about signing up, all of that is invented. None of it was in the prompt, and none of it has to be real. It just has to make sense. The result is an email that feels much more personal, more specific, and more like something a real person would actually write. That's exactly what the TOEFL rewards. As you practice, keep an eye on your tone as well. In an upcoming lesson, we'll look at how to make sure your language stays in the right register for the situation. But for now, the main takeaway is this. Details give you more to say. They make your ideas easier to follow, and they show stronger control of English. Make them up freely. Just make sure they fit. Over the past few lessons, we've built up a toolkit for the write and email task. We learned the basic structure, the greeting, the body paragraphs, the closing, in our organization lesson. We added ready-made phrases for different situations in the templates lesson. We talked about how to manage the 7 minutes in that same lesson. We practiced inventing realistic details, and we worked on matching your tone and register to the situation. In this lesson, we're bringing all of that together. This is the full process, from reading the prompt to finishing the email. Here's how it works, step by step. Step 1, read the prompt and identify the task type. Step 2, identify the register. Who are you writing to, and how formal should this be? Step 3, use the bullet points as your outline. What does each body paragraph need to cover? Step 4, pick phrases from the template guide for your task type. Step 5, invent the details to fill out each paragraph and give your writing substance. Then we're going to pause and give you a chance to try writing your own email and proofreading it. After the pause, we'll walk through a model response together, and you can compare. Here's our prompt for this lesson. Pause the video and read through it carefully. Also, take a moment to think about the first 2 steps. First, what is the task type? Second, what tone and register should you aim for? We'll discuss these on the next slide. As far as the task itself, in brief, your friend Callum has been accepted into a semester abroad in Japan and is thinking about going, but he's worried about the cost and falling behind in his major. He's asking for your honest thoughts. Before we do anything else, let's go through our 5 steps. Step 1, what type of email is this? Callum is asking for your opinion on a difficult decision. That makes this a type 3 email, offering advice or perspective. If you flip to the type 3 section of the templates guide, that's your phrase menu for this email. Step 2, what's the register? You're writing to a friend, so this is semi-formal. Think, warm, honest, like a real email to someone you care about. Not stiff, not like a formal letter to a professor. Step 3. Use the bullet points as your outline. Look at what each one is asking. The first bullet asks you to acknowledge Callum's excitement and concerns. The second asks you to share your thoughts on the benefits and risks. The third asks you to suggest how he could make his final choice. Those 3 bullet points just wrote the outline for your 3 body paragraphs. At this point, you may want to pause the video and attempt the next 2 steps on your own. That's because, on the next slide, we'll select some phrases from the template and suggest some ideas for invented details. That content will then be used to write the email. Now, on to step 4, pick some phrases from the Type 3 template menu. For the first paragraph, something like, "That sounds like a big decision, and I'm glad you reached out." That phrase is warm, empathetic, and gets right into the topic. For the second paragraph, the template has a useful structure. One sentence starts with, "One advantage of option is that," and then it follows up with, "On the other hand." That's a very structured way to present both sides. For the third paragraph, "Whatever you decide, I think specific step would be a good place to start, and have you thought about alternative?" Work well for suggesting next steps without being pushy. Step 5. Invent the details. The template phrases give us the scaffolding. Now we need to fill in the content. What are the actual benefits of going to Japan? What are the real risks? What specific next step might help Callum decide? None of this is in the prompt. We're going to make it up. Maybe the cultural experience and independence are the main arguments for going. Maybe there are scholarships worth looking into. Maybe talking to an academic advisor would clarify whether falling behind is actually as serious as Callum fears. These details don't have to be true, they just have to fit. Now it's your turn to set a timer for 7 minutes and write the email yourself. We'll display the prompt again on the following screen. Then you'll want to go through the same 5 steps we just walked through. Try picking your own phrases from the Type 3 template guide or come up with your own phrasing entirely. Also, try to invent your own specific details. The goal is to ultimately produce a real email on your own, not to copy the exact ideas that we just showed. Here's the prompt again. Go ahead and pause the video. After 7 minutes, come back and we'll walk through a model response together. Then you'll be able to compare your own version with ours. Welcome back. Here's one version of what this email might look like. Feel free to pause and read through the whole thing. The phrases highlighted in purple are phrases that came from the Type 3 phrase menu. Everything else that's colored in pink, the specific benefits, the scholarship idea, the advice to talk to an academic advisor, that's all the invented content. Now compare your version to the model. The specific details don't need to match. Yours might be completely different, and that's fine. What you're checking is the structure. Did you hit all 3 bullet points? Did you use a phrase or 2 to anchor each paragraph? Did your invented details feel realistic? Was the tone for a message to a friend? Those are the things that matter on the actual test. Note that these are exactly the kind of things to be looking for as you proofread your response in the last minute or 2 of your time on test day. And finally, are there any quick mechanical errors that you can fix? To sum up, the process for every email is the same. Identify the task type, decide on the tone, use the bullet points as your outline, pick template phrases to anchor your paragraphs, invent the details to give them substance, then proofread with content and tone in mind. You've now practiced each of those skills individually. The more you put them together, exactly like you did today, the more natural and automatic this process will feel on test day. Your writing will be scored based on a number of things, some of which are easier to practice and improve than others. One of the easiest ones to improve is organization. No matter how strong your vocabulary is, or how good your understanding of grammar, you can always practice organizing your writing. And for many people, improve the organization after just a few practice responses. One of the most important concepts in organization is the difference between general and specific statements. You'll be able to use this approach in both the email task and the academic discussion task. Often, longer pieces of writing follow a structure something like this. You start with a main idea, then move through a few supporting details or examples, and finally return to a general conclusion. This big structure is super neat and organized. It's a bit robotic, so a professional writer probably won't follow this structure. But on the TOEFL, you don't need to be a professional writer. I bring up this structure not because it's super important to follow when you write your response, though. In fact, your response to the email task isn't going to look like this. Emails are not essays, and so they don't have main ideas and conclusions in the same way. But I do want to talk about why this approach is effective for essays. Basically, this structure can be summarized as general ideas at the beginning. specific details in the middle, and more general ideas again at the end. The general statements set up your position, the specific parts explain or support it, and the final general idea ties everything together. That's important because we can apply that same pattern in different ways. It can work both in the large scale and the small scale. So within the same piece of writing, detail number 1 might actually use a similar structure. The writer transitions from the main idea into specific information, then briefly returns to that main idea to link to the next detail. This creates small mini structures inside your larger answer. Again, we have a general specific general structure. So let's look at this in practice. Here's an example prompt from an email task. You're asked to thank someone for organizing a film festival, comment on low attendance, and suggest ways to improve it. Remember that this is an email, not an essay, so the organization isn't going to be as strict, but we can still use the general versus specific approach in some ways. Here's a sample response. The first 2 paragraphs are conversational. We might find some of the key organization here, but not a lot. Where it's most noticeable is in the 3rd paragraph. In that paragraph, the writer includes a lot more information. Since there's a lot of detail, there needs to be more structure too. Take a minute to pause this video and read through the whole response, thinking about that organization. These general statements in purple act as glue between the green details. First, the writer introduces the idea of growing the audience for the next event. Then, they make a specific suggestion. After that, they return to a general statement, before moving on to a second suggestion, and then finishing with another general statement. This variety helps the paragraph feel natural, not just a list of ideas. It also gives the writer a reason to use different sentence structures, instead of repeating a similar sentence for each suggestion, one after the other. To illustrate a bit more simply, let's just look at 3 sentences from that response. We start with the suggestion to advertise on the campus radio station. Then we have the general idea of using more channels to promote the event, which is very general. That statement acts like glue to connect to the next suggestion about the school newspaper. Without these linking ideas, the details would feel like a list instead of a natural response. To summarize, strong TOEFL writing mixes general ideas with specific details. Use a general to specific to general pattern, both in your overall response and within individual paragraphs. General statements help connect details smoothly, and this approach works well for both email tasks and academic discussion tasks.